Good evening and welcome to this debate forum. I'm Roby Brock of Talk Business and Politics with KATV's Maureen Glisovic. We welcome you to tonight's event with State Senator Joyce Elliott, the Democratic nominee for U.S. Congress in District 2. She's the challenger to incumbent Republican Representative French Hill. There is no third-party candidate in the race. KATV and Talk Business and Politics extended a debate offer to the two candidates in the 2nd District congressional race. Elliott's campaign accepted the debate offer while Hill's campaign declined. And as we did 2 years ago, we decided to move forward with this forum in order to ensure that voters have as much information as possible headed into Election Day. By the way, the original debate proposal submitted to Elliott and Hill offered both candidates the opportunity to negotiate the date, time, and format for the forum.
And Senator Joyce Elliott, let's tell you a little bit about her. She served as an Arkansas state legislator since 2001, first serving as a state representative and then elected to the Senate in 2008, where she currently represents District 31. She serves on various legislative committees, including the Education Committee, where she is vice chair. Now, before entering politics, Joyce was a teacher for 30 years. Tonight, she's here to tell you why you should vote for her to become a U.S. representative who will serve Arkansas's 2nd congressional district. Good evening, Joyce. Now, first question, obviously COVID-19, that's been at the forefront of everyone's minds. Let's talk about some of the funding and what your plan is.
Well, I think the thing that we need to think about right now, because we have pretty much gone through the first phase of funding, I am encouraging our folks in Washington to please, get a deal made, because here are the things that need to be thought about. How do people who have run out of, any kind of funding from the federal government, how do they go from here? Because that money has not been replaced by jobs. And we know that families are destabilized, and we know right now our government, state and local, are now getting destabilized. And so what I hope to do, as in my position as a state senator, is try to urge our folks in Washington to make sure that we come to a deal. And I know that Speaker Pelosi and Treasurer Mnuchin are talking about it, and I think that the president is as well. But we need to be sure we take a look at how we're funding our schools, and are there extra things we need to do, and we certainly do. But beyond that, we need to be thinking about how do we come out of this pandemic, and looking at how we can redo our infrastructure. That's really important. It was important before the COVID-19, before the pandemic. It still is. But we need to be sure, though, that we are doing that at the same time that will build jobs for people, that will rebuild people, rebuild families at the same time. So I think it's just really important that we become focused laser-like on people rather than corporations in this next round of funding, so that people can have some semblance of life and have some sustainability and stability in the next few months. And one of the things I think we have to be careful about is not just setting a date, but setting targets, because if we say we're going to have funding for a number of months or weeks or whatever, we don't know that COVID-19 is going to cooperate with our dates. So we need to say when it's at this level, or we have this kind of growth or lack of growth, this is what we will do. And I'm always reminded, and I will hurry, I'm always reminded, that we've done big things in our country before, and we had tough times. We had the Depression. I'm old, but I wasn't there at that time. That we coalesced and we came together, and we worked our way out of those times. We did the same thing when we had the Depression, in the 2000s. So more than anything, I think we need great leadership, starting from the top, and decide how we're collectively going to be a part of coming out of COVID-19.
And I do have a follow-up question on the jobs. We still have thousands of Arkansans and thousands across the country who continue to be unemployed. And so how do we move forward with job growth and job creation during a pandemic?
Well, I think we need to think about these things. For example, let's think about the airlines. And right now, if we want to move from place to place, we're going to need the airlines. And it might seem like counterintuitive for some people, but we need to, if we keep funding these essential services that we have to have, then that's going to put us in a position to be able to grow when we come out of it. And because it makes more sense to set a goal and fund it rather than letting everything fall apart and starting from the bottom.
Can you provide an example of what you're talking about when you say set a goal? What does that mean?
Yeah. For example, if we say when COVID-19 is growing no more than 5%, That's what I'm talking about with the goal. What does the CDC say about when it would be a good time for us to go back to work totally? When's a good time for us to go back to school? Because we usually do that by looking at what the community is doing. Like we've had, say, 10 weeks of growth of 5%. That's what I'm talking about with a target, because if we say whatever number of weeks at whatever percent, instead of date, we don't know what that means. But if we think about this in terms of what we do as people, what we do as the public to help us reach certain targets with the growth, the lack thereof is what I'm talking about. Because, and further that question of if we start to rebuild our infrastructure, that is the major way. We've known this for years. That is the major way we can put people back to work. Because if we grow, if we build our infrastructure with the internet and broadband as we need to, we have bridges and roads, especially bridges that are falling down. We have not done what we needed to do for some of the upkeep, with our rails and so forth. This is a tried and true way that folks in Washington have been talking about before COVID-19 hit. But more than that, I think it's important that we fund, like we had the PPP to make sure that people were paid or got some funding, in place of work. But in a lot of countries where they've worked, the government has worked with businesses to keep them open. And when they get to the end of this, they are not restarting. And that's something we need to do in thinking about COVID-19, rather than just saying we're going to do this or that. We just don't have the coherent policy about what we're going to do. And I think that's the major thing.
Let's talk about health care. It folds into COVID-19. There's obviously been a lot of debate at the federal level in terms of the Affordable Care Act versus other alternative plans. Some are out there, some are at least spoken of a little bit more generally. You've been a supporter of the Affordable Care Act.
Yes.
A lot of critics of the Affordable Care Act say it has caused insurance premiums to rise, even though there are more people getting health insurance now. It was touted as a way to get more people on health insurance to bring premiums down. It has not done that.
Right.
Do you still support the Affordable Care Act, even though it has not accomplished that major objective?
I still support it because it is in Arkansas, for example, we've covered 300,000 more people. But I think we all knew when we first passed it, it was not everything it needed to be. And since that time, I think one of my big disappointments, Democrats and Republicans, is that we've said we were going to help fix it, and we haven't done that. And I know other things took over and people had other priorities. But what I hear from people in District 2, and I think it's true everywhere, just as you said, it is, the cost of the premiums are so much so that if you want it, if you have it, it's difficult to keep it. So some of the things I think we need to do, and I will tell you, I don't promise to know all the ways to do this, but I know there are folks who are far more experts than I am, that I'm willing to listen to the experts to help us get to work and figure out how do we bring those costs down.
What are some of the things that those experts suggest?
Some of the things they suggest is, looking at the cost of pharmaceuticals. How do we work on that to lower those costs? For example, right now, I hear from people, insulin is a huge problem for people to be able to afford. And this is a life-sustaining med that they need. And some of the other things they suggest is for us to explore different options so that we can have different options for folks to be covered. Not all on the ACA, not all private, but we just haven't explored all of the things we need to do. We don't have to be like any other country, but we can learn what other folks are doing and then Americanize whatever we want to do. It just can be done in a country that is, I think that is this rich. We can figure it out.
Let me ask one more question on healthcare, and then if you want to take us in another direction, that's fine. Your opponent in this race, Representative Hill, voted for the American Health Care Act in 2017. It passed the House of Representatives on a party line vote. It was very, very partisan in terms of Republicans supported it, Democrats opposed it. I'm assuming that you would have voted against that if you had been in Congress, but I don't want to assume too much. But will you tell me why you believe that plan is either a good plan or a bad plan?
Well, I try to be careful not to give myself too much credit and know what I would have done necessarily. So I'll give you my thoughts about the parameters I would have considered. Because I think the biggest problem with that plan was you could have the plan, but it didn't cover very much, or the deductibles were so high, most people could not even afford the deductible. And that was the biggest problem, because people were told, we're going to create a plan for you, but it was a plan that was not workable because they couldn't access it. Or if they did, they would find out things they thought were covered were not covered. And even though supposedly it covered pre-existing conditions, then we learned that some conditions were not covered when people went to try, if they were to go to try to use that policy, when you got down to the details.
I think some of it allowed the insurance companies to raise premiums to a much higher degree on people that did have some pre-existing conditions. They still had to cover them.
They still had to cover them.
But it was
That's
more
right.
expensive
Because
was
that, and
the CBO report.
That's right. And some people refer to them as trash policies just because you were told here is a plan. And there was a plan here, but it's one that you just could not use because of the cost itself. It was far worse than anything anybody ever said about the ACA. So it's not enough to just say we have a policy if people cannot figure out a way to access it, or the insurance companies are just doing whatever they wish to do, although you're saying, I will cover your pre-existing condition. And I'm a walking pre-existing condition. So it would do me no good as a person who's a kidney donor if I can have insurance, and I can have something that covers the pre-existing conditions, but the cost is so much that I can't even access it. Those are the biggest problems.
You mentioned broadband access in rural areas. We understand right now that there are some school districts who don't know the engagement level of their students or their grades. There is no way they're tracking how many students are actually logging on to virtual learning versus being in the classroom. And so what is it about the rural broadband piece, or your focus on being able to provide internet service to these rural communities?
Well, I'll tell you, when it comes to education, as a teacher for 30 years, I'm not just discovering this problem, because I think we think this was something that was uncovered with COVID-19, but if you were in the field, you knew that, that's not the case. And I also want to dispel the myth. It's not just in rural areas, because, for example, I was at an event in North Little Rock just yesterday, out in the Glenview area. And we're right here in the city, and we couldn't even get enough connection, to send something we were trying to send in the mail. But the problem with it is, though, we have decided that we're in the technology area, and it's more talk than it is action, because we know and we tell our kids this is a technological age, you need to be savvy about technology, but we have not collected the will to make sure that no matter where you are in this state, that we have funded it, we have done a piecemeal job of it. So I think we have to decide, just as we decided that, in the 50s when Eisenhower said, no, we're going to build the interstate highway, and it's the same kind of attitude. But the big difference was, Americans were working together more. It wasn't all this division that we're into now, this fear seemingly that we might help somebody that we don't intend to help. So if we would start to look at everything about the internet and broadband, the way folks did back then when we built the internet highway, and remember, it's for all of us. And the other thing that's important about that, that's really important, if you live in, if you live in Pangburn, if you live in Haskell, you ought to be able to live there and be able to get an education if you choose to. You ought to, but more than anything, you ought to be able to have a business there in your home or wherever, because this is the way so much business is going. If you don't have that internet service to be able to sell your wares or whatever, you ought to be able to sell them to Amsterdam, because that's what's happening in other countries. If we were to do that, it would really help grow our rural areas and the places, neighborhoods that are not growing right now. But we haven't collectively decided this is something important enough for us to do, and we should.
And you mentioned that it was a problem prior to COVID-19,
Yes.
and I think a lot of us do understand that not everybody has access to the internet. So what are some of the plans that you would have implemented by now? It's 2020, you'd think everybody would have access.
And, for example, in the Arkansas legislature, and most certainly we need to do it in partnership with the federal government, because we can't do it by ourselves. We did some partnering through the Department of Commerce, through UAMS. We did some partnering, but we didn't go all the way and finish the interstate highway, so to speak. And so that's what led to being spotty. And what I would like to see us do is have a coherent plan and not do things piecemeal, That's what we've done in the Arkansas legislature. That's what we've done from Washington, because we have gotten to a point, I think, of just as long as certain people are okay or certain groups are okay, we say enough. It's almost as if we have just internalized that word adequacy that has to do with education and so many other things we're doing. And so the plan has to be, I think, a partnership between the states, the state, local, and the federal government, and let's get it done. Because rather than having, huge tax breaks, we had a giveaway of $1 trillion basically to the, top 1%. What if we had used that money to do the things we need to do that would have benefited all of us, those in the middle class and those clamoring to get into the middle class? Our priorities are wrong. There's no reason, there's no good logical reason that we haven't done it, because we know better. We're just divided and seem not to be able to come together. And I don't accept that Washington has to be that way.
I'm going to ask you a blunt question about race, because I know you can handle a blunt question, number one, but yes. I would like to hear your position on it as well. The President of the United States has, in Charlottesville, described some white supremacists as very fine people. He referred to Kamala Harris, the Democratic vice presidential nominee, as a monster. He, in the first debate of this season, called for the Proud Boys to stand by. He's retweeted white supremacist tweets and videos. Is the president a racist in your mind?
Well, whether he is or not, he engages in so many actions that are racist actions. Because when you, and this is something I think we need to get a grasp in being able, I'm not looking for people to be comfortable talking about racism, but just because we are uncomfortable is not a reason not to talk about it. And so what we do is just try to just shut down the conversation, or listen for you to say something that we can jump on and call you a racist for even talking about it. But I think when he called, the Proud Boys and said, there were good people on both sides, there are not equivalencies there. So when the president, does the dog whistles that sometimes now, or howl, and calling Kamala Harris a monster, why do that? And and then when he talks about African Americans, he calls them the blacks. For the president of the United States, to do this kind of thing, and you can see repeatedly where he has, especially African American women, that he has derided time and time again. You can see that in reporters, although African American women are not the only ones, but you can just see a habit of how he puts down certain people and certain people
Why do you think it's so difficult for us to talk about race in this country? I've been dealing with it my whole lifetime.
Yes,
and I have a lot of friends that we do talk about it, not every day, but we do talk about it constructively. We haven't found a solution either. There's not a magic pill, but why is it so difficult?
Well, I think it's because we have told ourselves, we've given ourselves certain things. From the time you were small, people tell you not to talk about it. Don't talk about race, don't talk about religion, and even don't talk about politics. And then when we get to be adults, we've internalized that. And so when somebody brings it up, we're horribly uncomfortable. And so we were just people would say, stay away from that. But that has definitely been to our disadvantage. When I was a 15-year-old, integrating a school. This is when I learned this the really hard way, that I would not shrink from talking about race, because I think it's so important. It's okay to talk. It's okay to be uncomfortable. But when I was 15 and integrating that school, I had no idea at the time that the adults in that school, it was just my family and 3 or 4 other families. I had no idea that the adults in that school had talked to one of the white kids at that school and made them aware that I was coming. Joyce Elliott's coming. And what's wrong with Joyce Elliott? Joyce Elliott is a really good student. She has great grades. And if you want to be the valedictorian of that class, he was actually given permission to make my life difficult. Permission, and guaranteed nothing would happen to you. So, well, in an instance like this, what do you think we internalize as 15-year-olds? But I pretty quickly realized there is something really wrong with this. If adults are telling kids, and I didn't even know that story, by the way, until I was graduating from college.
Did you graduate as valedictorian?
Absolutely not. Okay. Absolutely not. because, you know, to just make this really quick, and I was challenged by the principal and the superintendent. I was called into the office a few days after I was there, and they had my transcript and challenged how I got these grades. And I was told to my face by 2 adult men, you won't be getting these grades here. And I didn't. And it was made. So, but what it taught me, though, was we were the victims of adult behavior. And as a kid, I knew there is something really wrong with this. And from that point on, I set myself out on a unity tour. Because all my life since that point, I thought, I'm not going to not talk about this. This shouldn't happen. This really shouldn't happen to kids. And so here we are now. We can't talk about it. And social media has made it worse, I think, because people are so brave behind that key. But, you know, and back to the president, I think the president definitely needs to lead on not displaying and showing that racist kind of behavior. But he's done it time and time again, and it's hurting this country.
Let's do one more question in this block before we take our first break.
Well, I did want to have a follow-up. You mentioned going on a unity tour. What is it going to take, in your opinion, for us to unite when it comes to racism or, you know, race conversations? Because we're seeing people talk about it more and more, you know, than ever, that I've never noticed in my lifetime. And it's a lot of, you know, you either fit in with this type of view or you're a racist. So what is it going to take to come in the middle?
Well, I think each one of us needs to become maybe not comfortable in the conversation, but comfortable that it is okay for us to be different. It is okay for us to have different thoughts, different attitudes about things, but it doesn't make each other bad. So I think what we need to do, and the public needs to be a part of this and stop waiting for the politician or the football player, the basketball player to do this. You know, do some things deliberately. We have the problem we have with racism because of some deliberate decisions that we have, like the people I just described, you know, at my school. So we have to be deliberate about making sure I have friends that don't look like me. If you are sitting here right here and now and you don't have friends that don't look like you, you need to do something about that. If you are not socializing with folks, you need to do something about that. If you are concerned about your kids going to school with certain kids, these are things that we have some control over, that we can demand that the systems change so that we have these opportunities to be together. So the first thing people are going to say is, you can't force people to be together. No, you can't. But as a result of my going to that school, and I was forced to go, I learned a lot out of that forced situation that I would never have learned had I not gone to that school. And so we need to look at policies, for example, you know, in our schools. What do we do in our communities to make sure we are living together? Why are our communities segregated? Why is it you can say this community over here is going to be all this pretty much, and that these things are happening because of deliberate policies that we have. So it's on us, and it's on us being clear-eyed and looking at the systems that made it happen. And where the problem tends to get really hairy, when we're all called upon to ask ourselves, how am I willing to be inconvenienced to do something about the racism problem that we have? Because if we think we're going to be comfortable and do it, that's not going to happen. And a lot of companies, a lot of folks on their own are doing a lot of what we call DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are some uncomfortable things to do, but people come out of them almost always, whether they like it or not, they come out better and understanding. Because I love those kind of exercises, because I love learning about people who have different thoughts from mine. But at the same time, I know not everybody loves it, so I'm not trying to judge other people by what I like and what I will do. But it is up to us to get it done.
All right, we got to take a short break here. We're with State Senator Joyce Elliott. She is the Democratic nominee for U.S. Congress in District 2. She's taking our questions. She's going to be taking your questions too. If you're watching us on Facebook, please add some questions to the comments section there. We're going to do that in the third block of this show. When we come back from this very, very short break, we're going to talk about some international issues with State Senator Joyce Elliott. Stay tuned.
Absentee ballots, mail-in ballots. Is it possible to rig the election?
Be the biggest RICO case that the FBI has ever seen.
7 on Your Side investigates. How safe is your vote? Tuesday at 10 on Channel 7 News.
From the campaign trail to election night results, unmatched coverage of the politics that shape our state and our nation. Channel 7 News, your voice, your future. Brought to you by Electric Cooperatives of Arkansas. You're working hard to keep your business moving forward. With Compulse Integrated Marketing, you can reach new customers and get results. We work with businesses across America, but we have experts right here. There are new ways to reach your customers with video, digital, and social advertising, and we're experts at all of them. Our solutions are affordable and they work. Compulse Integrated Marketing. Reach new customers and get results. Contact us right now. Let's partner together and keep your business moving forward.
And welcome back to Your Voice, Your Future, our Town Hall Q&A forum with State Senator Joyce Elliott. I'm Roby Brock with Maureen Glisovic from KATV. Joyce Elliott's taking questions for this full hour right here as part of our debate proposal. Just want to let everybody that might be tuning in a little bit early here know we proposed a debate between Senator Elliott and her opponent, Congressman French Hill. He declined our debate invitation, even though we made it optional in terms of date, time, and format. Senator Elliott accepted. We decided to go through with our forum so that we could let our audience know what your positions are on a lot of things as they go to the polls with the first day of voting starting right now. I'm going to let Maureen kick off this session. We're going to talk about international issues. Maureen, take it away.
Well, speaking of, today was the first day for early voting here in Arkansas. Let's talk about election interference. You know, there were a lot of talks at the last presidential election of Russia being involved. And do you believe that there is a chance that our elections could be rigged or interfered with?
I think they could definitely be interfered with because, you know, the evidence, as far as I understand it, even from the Department of Justice and from the CIA and other security systems that we have, that there's not any question that Russia is attempting to interfere again, and you know, with the bots and everything else that they do. Because one of the things we were just talking about race, for example, in the other set. One of the things that Russia has figured out is that the divisions that we have, and they are smart enough to use their bots and their algorithms to pit us one against the other, and primarily through social media. So I don't think there's any question that there is going to be attempts to interfere. What I hope and what I'm less certain about is whether or not it's going to end up rigging the election, because I think it's really important that I not set a tone where people don't believe in the process or think just automatically, you know, the elections have been rigged. But I think we have a lot of work to do to secure our elections. And the fact that we have 50 different systems, and if you look at the territories, more than that, 50 different kinds of systems across our country is something we need to take a look at. Because if you are maybe a larger state or a state that just has it together more, you know, you may be able to secure your elections more than some other state. And it's not as if I want this to come from Washington, but I surely think that we could do more to assist states in if we set a criteria. This is what it takes for it to be safe, and not to have cybersecurity become an issue. This is the kind of system you need, or these are the kind of metrics you need to be sure you're meeting to secure the elections. And then let's have a partnership and make sure that happens. But the other kind of interference to me that is even as sinister is voter suppression. And that is something that is very real. Because when it's made impossible almost for you to travel from one side of the county to the other to be able to cast your vote, say in early elections, I mean, that suppresses people's votes. And if we are not really careful at the polls themselves, when people come in to be poll watchers, that's perfectly fine. That's not an issue. But they shouldn't become poll intimidators And that's something I really worry about.
What's the difference between a poll watcher and a poll intimidator in your definition?
Somebody who, if I'm about to vote, for example, they are demanding that to see this or see that in a way that is frightful to a person, because this is the way you approach a person. We were just talking about a few minutes ago race, but I'll talk about this in terms of people who are perceived as being powerful and those who are not. Say I'm an older person and I go to vote, and I guess that could be me because I am one of those, or somebody who is voting for the first time and they're being approached and demands are made. I want to see this, I want to see that, because that's a voter intimidator. If you're at the polls and you're a poll watcher, there are rules that you follow that respect people, and you have a way of respecting people. If you want to question something, then you need to go to the people who are working at the polls and ask them to make sure whatever you have a question about, let them resolve it. You don't need to become the police at the polls. And that happens a lot in some places. And
I do have a follow-up on that. As far as being the intimidator, is it a lack of training with these poll workers, would you say, or is it just certain people who don't know how to handle these situations, or who's teaching someone or telling someone to be intimidating?
I think it's not a lack of training. I think there are people who are interested in having some people not to vote, because I know that falls on ears like people said nobody would do that. Well, we wouldn't even have to be concerned about how people carry out these actions if they hadn't already happened, because you can see the difference between if I'm at the polls as a poll watcher. I think perhaps you don't have the right ID. I don't approach you and bully you about it. I need to walk over to the people who are working, where you're signing your name and all that, and say, I think this person maybe doesn't have the ID that she should have. Would you take a look at it? And you don't escalate a situation, because when people get approached, sometimes, they don't like the way they are being approached. It just escalates into something that shouldn't be happening at the polls. And I think the thing that we need to be concerned about is doing everything we can to make sure people can vote rather than our suppressing the votes. And there are a lot of ways to suppress the vote. I would really like to see, for example, at age 16, I start our young people about what it means to vote. I wish we were teaching civics at a later time, not the 9th grade, and have students, in a situation where they are told about the vote, where they get to pre-register, because if they're pre-registering when they are taking civics, there's a connection between what they're learning and what their civic duty might be. And if we were to do a lot of these things, I think people would just be more savvy about what it means to go to the polls and be respected at the polls.
Let's talk about another topic. Congress has the power to declare war. They don't always do it. A lot of times we slip into some wars because of the executive branch of government. We have been in an extended, endless war, as some have described it, in Afghanistan and Iraq in the last 15 plus years. What would you do as a congresswoman to change the trajectory of what we're doing? And can one congresswoman be enough of a person to make a difference and influence us to either exit those wars or have a clearer mission about what we're doing in those hot spots around the world?
Now, one congresswoman might not be enough to do it, but one congresswoman can sure strike a match and hope some other people will do so along with her. Because I always remind people, it is difficult to think about you're one of, say, 435. What can you do? But I always remind people, we got into the pickle we're in by electing one person at a time. So I'm hoping I would not be the only person there thinking the way I'm going to describe that I'm thinking. Because we cannot, as the generals tell us, 150 or so generals, signed a statement in 2017 that said that we need to be sure we have a strong military, but we absolutely need to gear up our diplomacy side of our foreign policy, because we will never be able to build enough guns or to make sure we address all the problems in the world. So here's what I'm thinking needs to happen. Number one, before any president declares war and goes into any other war, Congress needs to authorize it. Because right now we're still operating on I think the 2001 authorization. that doesn't make, and look how many wars we've been in since that time. And part of it is Congress hasn't wanted to touch it because it's controversial, so we'll just let the president go ahead and declare it, then we'll criticize the president. President Obama actually asked Congress to authorize any further war intervention, and they refused to do it because it was easier to just let the president do it. The other thing I want to do is, I know we have to have a strong military, and we have a strong military, but I think we ask too much of our military families. And one of the reasons we have not built up, starting with our kids, we haven't built up a whole thought of the world. It needs to be balanced with diplomacy. So everybody knows about the ROTC. You know, kids start young. What I want to do, and what I've been talking to people about, for a number of years, and tried to get it started right here when we built the new school out at Southwest. I just did not prevail there. But I want us to start a DOTC, like ROTC. DOTC is a Diplomatic Officers Training Corps, so that our kids, especially in the South, because the diplomats tend not to come from the South, they tend to come from the coast and some of the more elite schools, you know, up the middle. Mm-hmm. But I would like us to start a Diplomatic Officers Training course so that we can, from the time up, just like we're teaching them to be reserve officers in the military, we're teaching them to become diplomats when they, when they get out of college or whatever the case may be. Then we have a balance, and because if we just keep letting it be about war, we're not building a world our kids deserve.
Where does this funding for diplomacy come from? Do you take money from the defense budget and move it into diplomatic channels? Do you advocate for that?
That's one of the things that those 150 generals said, that because there were weapons that the Pentagon did not want. And those generals said, we need to invest money. And they didn't necessarily say we're going to just deplete. People should not misunderstand that. They were not saying anything about deplete the Defense Department. But let's make some better decisions about how we're using the money so that we don't have to buy the next military weapon because we will have the soft power of diplomacy. And right now, under this new administration, we have really gutted the Department of State, but we have spent money at the Pentagon that the Pentagon did not even want spent there. So it's not a matter of money, it's a matter of will if we decide we're going to balance the way we conduct our foreign policy.
I do want to switch it over to immigration. How do you feel about how the Trump administration has handled that with the border, with the wall, with retaining and separating families, parents and children? How do you feel that's been going so far?
It's gut-wrenching. It was gut-wrenching to see. And of course, there are still problems there. But I think it's so easy to say we need to have comprehensive immigration policy, but we do, because we've not had it. And we know, experience has told us, if there's a wall, guess what happens? Some people figure out a way to get over it, under it, or whatever. So let's
apparently steal it is what I think is going on. I've read some stories. So.
Yes, yeah. And so as logical as it sounds, I used to teach my kids this poem, Mendon Wall by Robert Frost. And the big question was, I'd like to ask who you're walling in or who you're walling out, because the apple trees won't hurt the pine trees, and so what are you doing? And so, because people are resourceful, walls just tend to be, for the most part, it might slow somebody down. So I think it comes back to policy, the way we were talking. There's a reason we are not trying to get over the wall, for example, to get into Mexico, we'll just say, because, we don't have a wall on the northern border, and that says something right there in itself. We're not trying to clamor to get over that wall. But if we had the same conditions that other people have, we'd be doing the same thing because it's human. So if we would work, we just redid our policy, our trade negotiations with Mexico and Canada. Part of that should be, I think in a more thoughtful way, how do we make life better? What can we do to make life better for the folks on the other side that they're not trying to come here? We're not trying to go there, but something that I will never forget when we had the really, really high gas prices. But the gas prices were not high on the Mexico side. So when something is on the other side of that wall or whatever, that's going to make your life better, you will go after it. So we saw people in California going through San Ysidro to Mexico to buy gas, particularly diesel, not because that was their lives were in danger or that it was going to be, a catastrophic thing for them, but because that price was so much lower, they were going across that border to get it. And I wish we could use that as a metaphor to understand if you are so motivated about gasoline and the price that you would do that to get gasoline. How motivated are people who are desperate to come to our side? So I think there needs to be a more thoughtful way of making sure people don't want to come here. And we can't do that without talking with each other and talking with the other side.
And I do have a follow-up on the immigration issue. I mean, I'm first generation. My parents migrated to the United States years ago. Different process, of course. Do you believe we're at some point making it more difficult for a certain country to be able to migrate here, certain people with different backgrounds?
Yes. I know that we are, because when the president talks about certain people from certain places and calls them names, we have made it difficult even from some countries where people have been traditionally welcome. For example, with a lot of the South Asian folks who have been coming to, particularly from India, we have a huge number of people here who've migrated to America who are a part of, especially our professional class. Not everybody's in the professional class and doesn't need to be able to come here. But they used to be able to come here and have a visa and work and not be worried about being sent back home. That is not the case anymore, and we need them. But if it's somebody who, for example, the people who showed up at the border in Mexico, people have a right to present themselves for asylum. That's lawful. And a lot of times people think because they're at the border, they're just trying to sneak over. No, they're trying to present themselves and make their case, for asylum.
But there are some that are trying to sneak over, though.
No, there are some that are trying to sneak over. But I'm saying when you present yourself at the border, you're not trying to sneak. You're walking straight up there and saying, I'm here, I want to be able to make my case.
Let's do one more topic in this block before we have to move on. Let's talk about climate change. The Green New Deal is something that's supported by quite a few Democrats. I think that phrase has probably become vilified from different points of political views there. But when you do look at aspects of the Green New Deal, when you do look at aspects of things that are recommended to control climate change, it is potentially going to lead to higher energy prices for some people in some areas. It is going to expand the size and the scope of government. These are some of the criticisms of being too aggressive or being aggressive in controlling climate change. What do you support in this? Do you support the Green New Deal? Or do you support some aspects of it? Can you kind of outline your global environmental policies for us?
Yeah, part of what you said is the reason I don't support the Green New Deal. I do believe climate change is real. And I do believe that we are moving to a time where green jobs are going to be the wave of the future. But I think where we have to be careful about it, because sometimes we're a bit too flippant about it. We forget about people who have jobs that are not green jobs. And we need to be very careful that at the same time, if I say this is the wave of the future, and we need it to have a sustainable country, there's no question about that, to have different policies. But at the same time, you always hear me talking about balance a lot. I'm moving toward this, but I can't be flippant about a person who has a job that is not a green job, and it might not even be good for the climate right now. We need to make sure we are weaning away from this in a way that a person does not feel threatened, that I can't support my family, or that, I am now going to have to be on public assistance. So I think we haven't paid enough attention to doing those two things simultaneously. And so then we end up at loggerheads like this.
So let's take like a coal-fired power plant, for instance, which has been shown to create quite a bit of pollution there. I mean, are you advocating slowly easing out of those so the people with jobs at those coal-fired power plants don't lose their jobs, or should that come to an abrupt
No,
halt?
I'm the former, because if I'm working at a coal-fired power plant, and I grew up in Southwest Arkansas, I know personally about the one down in Fulton. We need to ease out of that, because if you just take something away abruptly, it's like people going to their jobs, and you've seen this happen. You left work yesterday and you come back tomorrow, and there is a lock on the gate. We have options about this when it comes to easing from the jobs that we call the ones that are going to be that we're phasing out of. We have time to think about doing that, easing out into something else, because it is unacceptable to us to just say, well, we're going to abruptly do this, and you and your family, you're on your own. We have to do it better than that, or we'll forever be fighting about something that we desperately need to change.
Are you ready for another break?
Another break.
All right. We are with State Senator Joyce Elliott, the Democratic challenger to U.S. Representative French Hill in the 2nd Congressional District. This is Maureen Glisovic, and I'm Roby Brock, and we're going to be back after this one last break. We're going to take some questions from some people that have been commenting on Facebook for the last 45 minutes. Be scared. Don't be scared.
Is it Halloween yet?
I don't know what it's going to be. We'll see. But we'll be back right after this.
Unsuspecting voters.
And we have over 3,000 points of information on each voter.
Targeted.
So when we are targeting voters, we know exactly who we're talking to before we talk to them.
Sold out.
The biggest customers, obviously, are the parties.
Spotlight on America investigates.
It's incredibly annoying and invasive.
Selling voters out.
It creeps me out that someone can knock on my front door and know all this information about myself and everybody else in my household.
Tonight on Channel 7 News at 10.
As a mother of two, I share the uncertainty and concern that many of you have about this school year. And whether you're sending them to class or learning online, start your mornings fully informed on Channel 7 Daybreak. You'll be the first to know about any new outbreaks, policy changes, or school closures. In a world full of change, there's one thing that hasn't: the consistent, reliable team on Channel 7 Daybreak. On your side, weekday mornings from 4:30 to 7.
Razorback football with Sam Pittman. Sunday night at 10:30 right here on Channel 7.
Welcome back to Your Voice, Your Future. I knew I was in the chair that's been slipping down all night long there, because I'm shorter than Maureen. I see how that works here. I'm Roby Brock with Maureen Glisovic. We are having a Q&A forum with State Senator Joyce Elliott, the Democratic challenger for the U.S. Congress in the 2nd Congressional District. For anybody that has not been paying attention, this 45 minutes to an hour that we've been up and running, we proposed a debate between Senator Elliott and her rival, U.S. Representative French Hill, the Republican incumbent. He declined our debate proposal. Senator Elliott accepted our debate proposal. It morphed into a forum that we want to let voters know where Senator Elliott stands on the issues. And in this particular segment, we are going to talk about questions and comments that have come from some of you that have been watching. So, Maureen, you get the first shot.
Okay, so one of the questions: eliminate the Electoral College and pack the Supreme Court?
Well, let's start with the Supreme Court. I'm kind of surprised that this has come up to to be something that's of a big import to people right now, because that's not on my radar whatsoever. Because I've been paying a lot of attention to what's happening now, with the present situation with the Supreme Court. And, it's such a hypothetical for me right now, to be honest with you. That's not something that I even have on my radar, because there's so many other things that I'm thinking about. But I do think it is something that is, a look over here and not look at this, the kind of things that we ought to be working on, like COVID-19. So I'm just not there with that question whatsoever. Something I would have to evaluate if it came to that.
Here's a question from a viewer that asked, Ms. Elliott, are you pro-choice or pro-life, and I would like for you to speak to the fact that your opponent has put a pretty harsh mailer out there saying that you're pro-extreme abortionist, but clarify your position on choice in life.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of words and things that I've been called, but I am pro-choice. But what that means for me is either you're pro-choice or you are anti-choice, because we should not, as legislators at any level, be interfering in what's happening in a family's life, the medical decisions that they make. So I don't know anybody who is pro-abortion, because I've seen situations where people have to make those tough choices about whether or not what they're going to do in these situations. And I never feel like, and I've said this so many times on the Senate floor, I don't ever feel as if I'm capable of telling you and your wife or telling a woman, because I'm a legislator, that I somehow know the best thing for you to do, and you don't. But what I do believe we need to be paying much more attention to is doing everything we can so that people don't face those choices. But sometimes I think people don't think about their inevitable choices people have to make. I remember sitting in a committee, and there was a husband and wife, happened to be a military family. And they had a horrible situation where they had to decide, what are we going to do? And I just kept thinking, at what point did I ever get qualifications to tell them what they should do? So I think the best thing we can do is stay out of a family's business and stay out of, a woman's business about the choice that she is going to make. But more than anything, I hope we will just do the things we should do, like make sure birth control is easily accessible and not put people in that position. Because I remember when we did not, it was not the law of the land. Roe v. Wade was not the law of the land, and some really bad things happened because people do what they think they have to do, no matter what the law is.
Next question is, we have 3 issues on the ballot here in the state of Arkansas. You have issue 1 with highway funding. Issue 2 will be amending term limits. And the 3rd issue will be discussing how just regular people get constitutional amendments on the ballot. So where do you stand on all 3 issues?
Well, I guess the one that bothers me the most is how regular people get initiatives onto the ballot. I just think this is so far afield of how we allow people to be engaged in our democratic and governmental process. I think it's a horrible thing that this has been referred, for people to vote on to make it more difficult for us to be able to, just regular people, put something on the ballot. So I'm definitely voting no on that one. And, when it comes to I think number 1 is the highways. And with a lot of regret, I am not voting for this issue, because there's no question, that we need the highways. I'm still working on it. But we need the money. But what I wish we would do, I said earlier how we piecemeal things. We don't have a coherent policy, and we're taking money away from higher ed to put into our highways. This is never going to build a sustainable system. And we need to figure out how do we build a sustainable system, and rather than, taking a tax. The tax has been there for a while, and we're just going to extend it. I understand that. And that's one of the reasons, the fact that we can pay it and we have been paying it, one of the reasons I wrestle with this one. But it gives us this false sense of security that we're doing what we need to do, rather than, decide how we're going to move forward and really sustain our roads and highways. And the 3rd one was?
Issue 2, when it comes to amending the term limits.
Yeah. I'm not for this one because I think perhaps I think people read it and think it's something that it's not. And that bothers me, because it almost sounds as if we're getting rid of term limits. And one good thing about it, because it has its good and bad sides, but one good thing about it, it does give a person an opportunity to come back and run again, but it also gives a new person an opportunity to run again and not have to run against an incumbent. But what we have right now with the 16 years, I think, is a better way to go, because you can run whenever you get ready to run. And I don't think we should try to decide based on when somebody wants to run of how we're going to amend the Constitution, because in our democracy, you're not required to wait until it's easier to run. You have to do kind of like what I'm doing now. You just have to run and do your best. And I think that's better for our democracy, to make us work hard at what we want to be able to do and participate.
We've got time for one more question, and it's going to be the softest ball question that you've gotten all evening. And you've answered a lot of policy questions, and we really appreciate that. I think voters have a much better understanding of where you stand on climate change, on jobs and the economy and COVID-19 and healthcare and international affairs. We really appreciate you spending time. So how much money have you raised in this campaign so far? What's your to-date total? That's not the question. I'm just asking.
But you don't want me to tell you? Is that what you're saying?
No, I do.
You said that's. I thought you said
the actual last question.
I've got a question. That's my question. I need to know what you.
I get a report about this every morning, and I think, and please don't hold me to this in case I have to call you back tomorrow and say it's a different number, but I think it's around it's beyond 2.5 million. But I'm not sure what it is.
All right, so here's the question from from a viewer here. If you could spend all of the money that you've raised, particularly the ad money, there it is. If you can spend all the ad money on something else, what would you spend it on?
I would spend it on pre-K, because I think it's so important that kids get a fresh start. Because in other countries where they have high-performing education systems, the thing they do is start at the very beginning, where you won't be able to determine what zip code a child lives in, who their parents are, the money they make, and they do that because they believe equity is the most important thing there is when it comes to educating a child, so that he or she can have an opportunity. But they start very, very early, and that's where I would spend it, because I think kids are just, they're everything.
All right. We did not get to all of the questions and comments that came through, but I'm pretty sure that your campaign staff will do a fine job of culling through all of the comments in the Facebook feed and pick out the ones that they at least want to try to answer. So we're going to leave the rest of it there for that. Senator Joyce Elliott, thank you very much for spending the hour with Maureen and me. Maureen, I'll let you say your
Well, we really appreciate your time. Again, we did extend this debate to Congressman French Hill, and he did decline to do that debate. So we got to learn a lot about, your policies, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Well, I appreciate having the time. Thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome. And that concludes Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Roby Brock with Talk Business and Politics.
And I'm Maureen Glisovic with KTV.
All right. Thank you for joining us.